when Can appeared at the door. Rain was pouring outside as if emptied from a bucket. Water dripping from his wet coat formed small, dark puddles on the parquet floor of the dot hallway. Mert, my friend. My friend, you saved my life, Can said with a tired but grateful smile. He hadn't expected the renovation in his own apartment to last this long. I let him in and offered him a hot coffee. At that moment, I didn't know that the rain was about to break not only the outside world, but also the fragile dam of peace inside our souls. My apartment was on the top floor of an old but sturdy building, far from the noise of the city. It had high ceilings and large windows. Can settled onto the wide, velvet-covered sofa bed in the living room. The first night was completely normal. We talked about old memories, about the ridiculous horror movie marathons we had during our high school years. We laughed. We thought we knew what fear was. We believed it was nothing more than fleeting images appearing on a screen. We wrote real fear. Did not scream. Real fear was patient, and it whispered. When I woke up in the morning, there was a strange, heavy smell inside the apartment. I found Ken sitting at the kitchen table. The cup in front of him had gone cold, his eyes fixed on the gray sky outside the window. He flinched when he saw me. Mert, he said, his voice cracked. Why did you do that last night? I didn't understand. Do what? Around 3 in the morning, Ken said, rubbing his temples with his fingers. You came to my door. You didn't come inside, but you stood there. I saw your shadow through the gap, under the door. You were chanting something strange, like a nursery rhyme, but the words were reversed. Something like skin, bone, climb inside, bone, skin, throwed it outside. It felt like it lasted for hours. My blood ran cold. I had slept straight through the night. In fact, the only thing I remembered dreaming about was swimming in an endless, pitch-black sea. Can, if this is a joke, it's really not the time, I said. I didn't even step out of my room last night. Ken looked at me with eyes full of disbelief. From that moment on, the old, unshakable wall of trust between us developed its first crack. We didn't yet realize what was seeping through that crack. That night, I woke up in the middle of my sleep. The silence filling the room wasn't the absence of sound, but rather the suppression of one right next to my ear, as if coming from inside the pillow. A sound. Drip. 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 As if a thick liquid were slowly dripping from the invisible voids above the ceiling. But my room was dry. I turned on the lamp. The light wasn't enough to chase away the shadows in the corners of the room. I lifted my pillow and my stomach turned. Exactly where my head had been. Resting, there was a yellowish, greasy stain about 10 centimeters wide on the sheet. I moved my hand closer. The smell was unbearable. Rotting flowers and burnt hair. The stain was still damp, as if something had been sweating upward from beneath the sheet. I ran to the bathroom immediately and washed my hands for minutes. When I looked into the mirror, I didn't recognize myself. Dark circles had formed under my eyes. My skin had turned pale. My reflection seemed to move a second after I did. Primera looked Hawaii. When I went into the living room, I saw that Can was awake too. He was sitting in front of the television, but the televisión was off. He was watching his own face reflected in the dark screen. "It's coming, Mert," Ken said without turning around. It finished the words. Now it has started. With the touches, the smell inside the apartment was everywhere now. No matter how much thought we aired the place out, that damp carnivorous odor wouldn't go away. Ken and I barely spoke anymore. We each retreated into our rooms, locking our doors from the inside. But the locks weren't enough to stop it. That night, I felt movement on my ceiling. When I opened my eyes, I saw the plaster in the exact center of the ceiling stretching, as if there were an enormous weight above, ready to collapse onto me at any moment. Thin cracks began to form in the plaster. From inside those cracks, black, hair-like fibers started to dangle downward. I couldn't move. Takaseise. Was it sleep paralysis? Or was the presence of that thing nailing me to the bed? The black fibers slowly extended, drawing closer to my face. I felt a cold sting at my fingertips. Something invisible. Ice cold hand gripped my ankles from beneath the sheet. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt as if it were filled with that sticky liquid. I could only let out a muffled growl. At that moment, laughter rose from Ken's room. But it wasn't any laughter we knew. Choppy, rhythmic, and completely emotionless. "I see you," Ken was shouting. "I see you gliding on the ceiling. Touch me. Let me inside." By morning, we both looked like ghosts. There were bruises on Ken's neck that looked like fingerprints. "I must have done it to myself," he said with empty eyes. I was drowning in my dream. It must have happened while I was trying to save myself. This couldn't go on. Either we were both going insane together, or there was something living in this apartment with us. "Look, Ken," I said, slamming my fist on the table. My hands were still shaking. "Tonight, we prove everything. We're setting up cameras in both our rooms. Phones, old laptops, webcam, whatever we have. We'll watch the recordings in the morning. If we're playing tricks on each other, it'll all come out." Ken smiled bitterly. "A trick? I wish, Mert. I wish it were just a joke. But those cameras will only show us what we were. Never meant to see." Are you ready? That night, as the red lights of the cameras glowed in the darkness like monster eyes, I got into bed. At exactly 3 a.m., I heard all the clocks in the apartment stop at the same time. A mechanical click hand, then absolute silence, and then the sound of a wet cloth being dragged across marble. The black fibers on the ceiling began to extend again, but this time it wasn't just fibers. From the corner of the ceiling, defying gravity, a long, broken figure glided down. It had no face, just a smooth, skin-covered void. It leaned down and whispered into my ear. This is where the words end, Mert. Now the story begins. When the first light of morning filtered into my room, I found myself curled up in the middle of the bed, in a fetal position. Every bone in my body ached, as if I'd been pressed all night. Ken was sitting silently in the living room. The laptop on the coffee table in front of him looked like a closed coffin. No one spoke, because speaking meant accepting the reality of what had happened during the night. "Come on," I whispered. "Let's watch." Ken opened the living room camera footage with trembling fingers. The recording started around 1 a.m. Ken was tossing restlessly on the couch, but at exactly 3:14, the dot screen flickered with static. When the interference cleared, a dark shape appeared. In the corner of the ceiling, this wasn't a simple shadow. The white plaster of the ceiling was bulging outward as if someone were punching it from behind. Then the thing seeped out. Its joints moved jerkily, like rusty hinges scraping against each other. Using its long, disproportionate arms, it crawled along the ceiling like a spider. When it reached the spot, directly above Ken, it stopped. Defying gravity, it dangled downward, its feet stuck to the ceiling. That faceless head hovered mere millimeters from Ken's sleeping face. We froze the frame. Ken's face was pale white on the screen. The creature's hands, if they could even be called hands, because its fingers were as thin and long as razor blades moving through Ken's hair. But the most horrifying part was Ken's reaction. Instead of showing pain in his sleep, Ken was smiling. Such a wide, artificial smile that you could see the muscles dotting his cheeks, straining as if they were about to tear. "Now let's look at your room," Ken said. His voice sounded so deep, as if it wasn't him speaking, but a void inside him. I held my breath as the recording from my room began. The time was again 3:14, but the entity behaved differently in my room. Instead of coming down from the ceiling, it rose like smoke from beneath my bed. From the spot with the yellow stain, it climbed onto the bed and sat directly on my chest. The Mert in the video me was thrashing as if suffocating, but my eyes were closed. The creature leaned down and produced something from the thin slit where its mouth should have been. It looked like a thick, black strand of thread, and it slid toward my open mouth. I watched myself swallow that black thing. My throat swelled, the veins bulging, outward turning pitch black. At that moment, the sound of the wet cloth scraping across marble rose from the speakers, but this wasn't a sound, it was a command. That day, we tried to leave the apartment, but when we reached the door, we realized the key wouldn't turn in the lock. The door wasn't locked. It was as if the door and the dot wall had become one. The windows wouldn't open either. Behind the glass was dot-only, absolute, dense fog. The city was gone. The streets were gone. Only this apartment and us remained. Ken went into the kitchen and picked up a bread knife. "Mert," he said, his voice now barely a whisper. The whispers won't stop. They're not just at that night anymore. They speak during the day now. They say the skin is too tight. They say what's inside is bigger. The outside doesn't fit the cage anymore. I looked at Ken's wrists. I could see something swimming beneath his skin. Small, worm-like bulges were moving rapidly, just under the surface, crawling from his elbow toward his shoulder. "Ken, put the knife down," I shouted, but my voice didn't echo off the walls. It was as if the walls swallowed it. "It was right," Mert Can said, staring at me with empty eyes. "We're just clothes. Clothes worn by the real thing inside. Clothes that wear out and tear over time." Compressed the knife against his arm. No blood flowed, only that thick, pitch black dot liquid and the familiar metallic smell seeped out of the cut. When night fell, we no longer needed the cameras. Everything had become visible to the naked eye. The ceiling had completely darkened, and the black fibers had wrapped around every corner of the rooms like vines. Ken stood in the middle of the living room. His body began to bend at impossible angles, despite being awake. I could hear his bones breaking. Crack! Tooth, the creature, the shadow from the ceiling descended onto Ken and wrapped around him like a cloak. Ken's scream blended with that wet, scraping sound until they became a single noise. My friend's face slowly erased itself. His eyes, his nose, his mouth, all disappeared beneath that smooth, fleshy void. When I woke up in the morning, I found myself in the stairwell of the apartment building. I was wearing only my pajamas, soaked through. My door was closed. I pounded on it, screamed, but there was no response from inside. I waited 4 hours until one of the neighbors came out. When the police arrived and we went inside, there was nothing in the apartment. Cans, belongings, his suitcase, the laptop, the cameras we had set up, all of it had vanished. The apartment was empty and dusty, as if no one had lived there for years. Only in the center dot of the living room, where Can had last stood, there was a burned human silhouette on the parquet floor, and my pillow in the bedroom. It still had that fresh, yellow stain on it. I moved out of that apartment. I left the city, but I couldn't escape. Now, as I write these lines, I'm staring at the ceiling of the cheap boarding house room where I'm staying. The plaster is slowly stretching. The rhyme echoes in my ears. Skin, bone, climb inside. I'm afraid to look in the mirror. Because when I woke up last night, I felt a hardness in my throat. When my eyes accidentally flicked to the mirror, I saw Ken's fingerprints where my throat should be. But they weren't pressing from the outside. They were pressing from within. My words are running out. I can't write anymore, because the skin at the tips of my fingers is thinning, and something pitch black and sharp is trying to push its way out from underneath. If you're reading this and you hear a sound from Dot beneath your pillow in the middle of the night, do not lift the pillow, and never, ever look at the Dot ceiling, because it's waiting to be looked at. It's waiting for you to give it a name so it can come inside.